Hello everyone at the Hawkesbury Library. My name's Katherine Firkin and I have a debut novel out which is called Sticks and Stones. This is my little baby. It's been about 5 years of work, this one. So I am extremely excited to see it out in the world. Of course, it's a bit of a different world than what I was expected, being in the middle of a global pandemic. So it's really wonderful that I get a chance to have a chat with you via Zoom, even if I don't get a chance to actually come and visit in person. So my little book, Sticks and Stones, it's a crime thriller set in Melbourne, and it follows my lead detective, Emmett Corbin, who's the head of the Missing Persons Unit. And when we first meet him, he's really feeling a little bit unsure, a bit unimpressed with the role that he's taken on. He finds that this unit is really quite under-resourced and understaffed, and he's really left swamped with these, what he considers to be quite banal cases, which he thinks that local stations really should be handling themselves. But then he comes across this case of a missing mum, and this is really when everything starts to change for Emmett. He quickly learns that this missing mum left her 2 children at a holiday program, and she never returned to pick them up. So it immediately does look really quite suspicious. But it doesn't take too much digging before Emmett discovers that this mum's family, and indeed herself, they have been hiding some pretty big secrets. So it does become quite a complex, intriguing case, and we really see him go from one end of the spectrum to the other. From being a little bit bored and a bit unimpressed with this role that he's taken on as head of Missing Persons Unit in Melbourne, to suddenly finding himself effectively chasing this really dangerous predator through the city streets. Now, a lot of the inspiration for this book did come from my personal background. I am a journalist by trade. In fact, I've been in the media for 13 years now, which gives me a little bit of a fright when I tell people that, because it doesn't feel that long. But it has been a good 13 years, and I've worked across every medium: TV, radio, print, online, you name it, pretty much. Most of my job has involved crime and court reporting, and that really has been a huge inspiration for this book. One of the things that really still shocks me to this day when I particularly look at court reporting is this cycle of neglect, and how it really does span through the decades, and how if there's no intervention, or even perhaps not enough intervention, it really can trigger some pretty horrific consequences that do tend to go down the line. When you get a chance to read Sticks and Stones, in case you forget what it looks like, you will find that I have used the mechanism of having these flashbacks through the book, and that does tell the backstory of someone who does turn out to be a little bit disturbed and a little bit vulnerable. I won't give away too much, of course, until you get the chance to read it, but this whole storyline, this whole thread does come from that idea that when I sit in court, I do see offenders all the time who have these really quite horrific backstories, and it's not even necessarily in the most violent of cases. In fact, I was in court just the other day covering a story in Melbourne, and this was about 2 guys who had stolen a Porsche, and they had used the Porsche to ram police cars. So it's certainly not a great thing to do, but it's not on the extreme end of offending. And yet, when the judge was sentencing these guys, he read out a bit of their history and their childhood and how they came to this point. And some of the detail that we heard in court was just absolutely extraordinary. I mean, one of the guys, and I'm going off the top of my head here, but when he was about 6 years old, his dad beat him effectively to a pulp because he didn't like the way he brushed his hair. Then when he was about 8 years old, he took him and made him sleep the night in a cemetery because he said, "You're such a disappointment to me. I'd rather you were dead, get some practice being dead and sleep the night in a cemetery." I mean, can you imagine being 8 years old and literally being alone in a cemetery all night with your dad telling you he wishes you were dead? And then when he was about 11 or so, this kid had started to get a little bit of normality, and he had joined a local footy club, and he was starting to make friends, and things sort of were starting to go okay for him. And then his dad came and turned up and watched one of his games, and supposedly he was so disappointed by this boy's skills that he started injecting him with amphetamines before each game. And when you look at a history like that, a childhood like that, it never excuses the crimes that they commit later on, and you would never ever condone what they end up doing. But you certainly have to question, what chance did that kid have? You know, how were they able to be put in that situation where the people that they trusted the most and that they needed the most were able to let them down time and time and time again? And that is a huge inspiration for this book. I do give you the backstory of the offender. I also give you quite a few narratives of other characters, because it is a fascinating thing for me how we all end up in this point, particularly when I sit in a courtroom. How did we all end up here? Crime doesn't discriminate. It does affect people from all areas of life, all walks of life. You can be absolutely at the top of your game and be affected by crime. You can be on the other end of the spectrum where it's perhaps the only thing you've known your entire life. And that's something I have tried to show through Sticks and Stones, these different narratives that weave through the different timelines and how crime can unfortunately impact everyone, and it does have that sort of intersecting moment in time, I guess. The other case I want to talk about really quickly, because I don't want to keep you too long, is a case all the way back in 2014 that I covered as a court reporter. This was also a huge, and I don't like to use the word inspiration when I'm talking about real crimes, because there's nothing inspirational about murder whatsoever. But it's certainly, this case got me really starting to think, and this is when I started to write this book. And that was the murder of hospitality student Renee Lau. When I say her name, it bothers me that most people listening probably won't even know who I'm talking about. In my mind, this was one of the most brutal murders Melbourne's ever seen, and I don't believe that it got the coverage at the time that it deserved. Renee was over from Hong Kong. She was working as a pastry chef. She was absolutely loving life, and this man, Scott Allen Miller, quite literally grabbed her off the street one morning, dragged her in an area just off the Botanical Gardens in the CBD, and brutally raped and murdered her. And it was horrific. The detail that we heard in court about this case, I will never forget. The attack lasted over 80 minutes. The prosecutor said that her head injuries reminded them of someone who had been in a horrific car accident. That is what this man did to her. And the reason this case got me thinking so much was because I never really got to tell the story of this poor woman. I never really got to tell even the story of the offender and how he got to commit something so horrific and so brutal. And I will remember sitting in court and looking at this man, and you know, they're only meters away from you in the dock, and he was just completely disinterested. He was yawning. He had absolutely no remorse at all, certainly none that he was visibly showing. And it just really got me thinking, who is this person? How can they possibly go about doing something like this with no regard, no care at all? He did not care. Her family were there crying. It was horrific. Journalists among us were struggling to keep our emotions together. I certainly was, and he did not care. And that's when I started to really look in the backstory of both him and also the victim, and start to delve a little bit deeper into how some of these crimes happen. But I know that's a little bit heavy, I promise. This book, it's quite fun, it's quite light. I know that sounds a bit crazy given what I've just said, but it does give you the grittier side of crime. It certainly gives you the grittier side of Melbourne, but there's also lots of fun. I've been told it's a fast page turner. Hopefully you will love it. So please do give it a go. I would absolutely love it, especially during pandemic time when I can't come and visit everyone. I believe it will be at the Hawkesbury Library. I know for sure that Turning Page in Springwood, I believe it is, has this book. Of course, I would love you to support local if it's possible. So that's Turning Page in Springwood. Give it a try. And if it's not for you, give another Aussie author a try. We really, really do appreciate the support at the time. Thank you very much for listening to me. Hopefully one day I'll get to actually visit in real life. See you then.